So hello and welcome to this video with the Roland SYSTEM-500 555 module. This is very much a demo of the 555 Eurorack module, but framed around this tutorial educational element of learning these modular functions. Ring modulation, Portamento generation, sample and hold, LFOs, what a delay trigger on an LFO does, noise sources and plenty more. So let's check out what's to come before we get into it. Now, as we've seen and mentioned, the 555 is a multifunction utility-style Eurorack module. It offers us sample and hold, and it can sample the internal LFO or an external signal. It gives us dual Portamento generation, ring modulation, noise sources, and a comprehensive LFO with CV over its rate and a delay trigger, allowing us to create this classic fade-in vibrato style sound. So you've seen the panel, I've quickly walked through the functions. Let's dive into some patches. There is a timing index on screen right now and in the description, so you can skip around. And it's very much about learning these modular functions in the context of the 555 module. Thanks to Roland for sponsoring this video, and let's get into it. So this patch is to demonstrate the sample and hold function on the 555. Now a sample and hold needs an input, something to sample a voltage from, a clock or a trigger or a gate, something to tell it when to hold the voltage that is present at the input, and an output. We have our output here feeding multiple sources. I'll go into that shortly. The clock output and this clock rate are doing two things. The clock is the internal clock for the sampling, but the clock output is feeding my envelope, which opens up my VCA and lets through the sound. Now my input here can be an external signal, selectable on this rotary switch, white noise, pink noise, or a range of LFO waveforms from the LFO on the 555. Now the actual output is feeding a splitter, and that's going to control the pulse width of the square wave or pulse wave on my oscillator and the cutoff on my filter. It's also controlling the panning here on the 531 stereo mixer. Now let's start by looking at how different waveforms at the input give us different patterns within this sample and hold. Noise by its very nature is random. The white noise here is a much lower amplitude coming in, so we don't get that range of values like we do from the pink noise. Nice stepped random voltages. The square wave, just having high values and low values. And these are all coming from this LFO, remember, so if I speed this up, is either a high value or a low value. The triangle wave, we can hear the voltage rises and falls, much like the LFO. If I speed that up, depending on the clock rate and the rate of this LFO, we can get seemingly random modulation even out of the more basic standard waves. But slowing this down again, we can hear that triangle wave being stepped, kind of creating a pyramid-like up and down waveform. Now the falling ramp wave or falling saw, and we can really hear the modulation here on the pulse width, the cutoff of the filter and the panning as this moves across from left to right. The ramp rises in voltage and drops again. And the sine, very much like the triangle. Now going back to pink, so it's random, we also have a lag time, and lag introduces a portamento or slew or glide or lag. all of these words means a smoothing out of the change in voltage. Think of it as a filter for sub-audio signals, much like the Portamento. So add in lag time. It's like playing notes on a keyboard and turning up the Portamento. It's gliding or sliding between these values. When it's at a higher value, and say a lower clock rate, it just seems to kind of smoothly fluctuate, randomly move, and this is great for adding life and modulation to your patches. Of course, with it off, steps again, and little bits of it create these nice lags and glides and slides within your modulation. We set the switch to external, we can sample anything at all, audio, CV, LFOs, anything you'd want to throw in there. So here we're going to use the sample and hold as an audio rate downsampler effect. And downsampling or downsamplers are often something that you find controlling sample rate on, say, Bitcrusher plugins and other effects and hardware as well. The sound before we go into this though is simply a low pitch saw wave from the 5112 oscillator into the 505 filter, and I'm using the LFO here on the 555 with the ramp simply controlling the cutoff of this filter into the mixer, and then it's getting recorded. Now the 505's got that great full on kind of bubbly nasty resonance, great kind of aggression to it at higher settings. But let's actually take this sound as the external input to the sample and hold. I'm then going to patch the sample and hold output into the mixer to be recorded. But we can't quite get this clock fast enough to really do much other than kind of do a weird robot burp at us. So I'm going to take an oscillating filter. That's just simply turning the resonance up full, and use that as a clock signal. You can put audio into this clock input. And simply dropping the rate of this filter. The audio rate, the frequency of this filter, is like the sample rate of what's coming through the sample and hold. The input is this filter, and as I drop the rate, controlling the clock, we got all these great kind of aliasy, digital, crunchy top ends. As we drop the rate further, there's all this great vocal, formant, vowel-like sounds. Let's try, say, a ramp wave. That classic yeah, kind of robot modern talking-like sound. So we can use this again as an audio rate downsampler by patching an audio source into the external clock, audio to the external input, and listening to or recording its output. So here's a simple kick, clap, hi-hat, drum beat patched up from some hex inverter drum modules. This is coming into this mixer totally dry. There's nothing going on other than it coming in and being recorded. Nice, tightly compressed beat. You can hear that kind of snap around that clap. And I've actually split the input, one to come here so we can hear it dry, and another into the 555. And this is going to be another patch using this sample and hold as an audio rate downsampler. So again, I've used an audio source into the external clock. Again, this is just the oscillating filter, this time from the 510, and we'll move the rate of this filter, controlling the rate of this clock and downsampler effect as we go. The input is again this drum beat, and the output comes into channel 2. Nice crunchy downsampler, digital kind of crunch to it. Now changing the rate of this clock, which again is actually an oscillating filter in this case. So at higher rates, it's got that nice subtle kind of crunch, like a kind of low rate sampler kind of vibe. and then that really kind of digital slap and crunch on that clap. Dry sound, and then going through the sample and hold. So you could use this as if it was a pedal or some kind of external rack gear or hardware for processing not just synth waves but beats and anything else you want to throw at it. So in this patch I've made percussion sounds out of the noise sources on the 555. The pink noise is my snare or clap-like sound, the white noise is my hi-hat. Now the only thing external in terms of sound to the SYSTEM-500 is this kick. That's a separate Eurorack module. Here's the pink noise of the clap. And the slight reduction in high frequencies just makes room for the hats. That use the white noise. Now the patch here is pink noise out into the VCA, the 530 VCA. I'm using external triggers on these purple signals coming from a sequencer. Envelope into VCA, into the mixer. Super simple. Now the hats are the white noise. First into the 505 filter for some filtering. Into the VCA, separate envelope from the 540, opening that VCA, and here I'm going into the phaser, just to get some of that swoosh and some movement in the top end. So external kick, pink noise snare or clap, white noise hi-hat. Now as a little bonus, I thought I'd make a little Karplus Strong percussion sound. Now Karplus Strong Synthesis is where we use something to excite an almost oscillating delay line, a high feedback delay line with a very fast delay time. So as I turn up the resonance on this delay, that's the feedback setting the length of the decay of this kind of virtual string that Karplus Strong Synthesis creates. And I'm just using an external trigger to excite it. It's not actually an audio input, it's just an external trigger or gate or clock into the input. Delay time will tune this sound. It's quite noisy out of this delay chip, but it's very characterful. There's that gate if I turn the mix down. You can hear it's not really anything exciting, but it's enough to just trigger this sound. So that's making percussion with the noise sources. So here we're using this pink and white noise source to inject some fuzziness, vintage-ness noise into a synth voice. Now the synth voice is the all-in-one 510. Grey cables are external signals, pitch sequence and some envelopes, one into the filter and a faster, more rhythmic or more dense envelope pattern into the VCA. Now kind of cancelling out the noise, opening the filter. There's a sequence into some reverb. And then a less frequent envelope. So I'm just going to kind of get the filter where I like the sound of the sequence, and then add a little bit of envelope. Nice and acidic. So I'm going to mix some pink noise into the input of the filter. Those higher frequencies when that resonance kind of bites. Bring in these nice noise hits, but using noise as a modulation source, let's modulate the filter with the white noise. Gives a kind of fuzzy vintage weirdness to it. So let's check out the LFO on the 555. We've got control over frequency, a triggered delay, which is like that classic fade-in vibrato that you can quite easily patch up or select on switches and knobs on, say, the SH101, SH09 and other Roland synths. We have a range of outputs, and I'm using a stack cable with an LED on so we can see the rate. We don't have a rate LED like on some of the other parts of the module. We have square, triangle, falling ramp or saw, rising ramp and sine outputs. So let's go through the rate and those different output shapes. There's square. From the lowest rate. Medium to high. Triangle. That's saw. Rising ramp. And this is just controlling the cutoff of a filter and the sine. But the nice thing is the CV over frequency. So using a slower sine wave LFO from elsewhere in the system, we can modulate the rate of this LFO, therefore modulating our modulation, which is a really nice thing about modular, modulating your modulators. Let's go to a slightly faster rate. Maybe check out the ramp. And say 2 sine waves, moving quite slowly. And this sine wave modulating it is speeding up and slowing down the LFO. Now going back to, say, the triangle, we can also use this delay and trigger this onset, this fading of the delay. I'm going to use the clock output as my trigger from the sample and hold section into the delay trig. First speed this up. And then as I turn up the delay amount, every time this clock fires, this LFO then fades in. We can have really long delay fading times. So good range of shape outputs, CV over frequency, and this delay trigger. Let's patch up this classic kind of fading vibrato over some melodic synth patterns. So here we're looking at this delay trigger on the LFO section of the 555 to create that classic fading vibrato sound. Notice when the notes come in, their pitch is stable and strong, and it starts to wobble and vibrato, that kind of LFO wobble within the pitch as the notes fade away. So the patch is this 510 full synth voice going out into some effects and back into the mixer. And the LFO is going to the FM input on the oscillator. Notice if I take this delay trig out, the LFO is constantly wobbling that pitch. But because each new note that fires an envelope for the filter and VCO also triggers this delayed fading, this delayed kind of onset and swell. The LFO fades in, create more movement, more modulation of the modulation, in this case over pitch. I'm using the triangle wave here. We could also say take the sine into the filters cutoff, really emphasize the effect. So here we're going to take a look at the ring mod. Now there's simply the X and Y input and the ring mod out. Not a massive amount to see, hence me zooming out so you can see more of what's going on. Now this patch is the two oscillators from the 512, both triangle waves into the X and Y in, and currently going straight into the mixer. Let's play around with these oscillator rates and listen to some of these overtones that the ring mod creates. Some really nice rich tones, very different from your standard oscillator waves. We could swap one of these to say a saw wave. Now let's take the signal out into a filter. We'll go with a 505 and I'm going to use an envelope just being triggered rhythmically to open and close the filter. A bit nicer to listen to than droning waves. And all those great ring mod overtones give the filter loads to go at. Let's make them both saw waves. Listen to that. Kind of like a real dirty fuzz pedal almost. Let's try square waves for both of them. Some really nice aggressive tones. So that's ring modding two oscillators, playing around with the tuning and the wave shapes, and then just modulating them through the filter, because this ring mod just gives the filter loads to go at. So here I'm using the ring modulator to ring modulate a drum beat against a whole synth voice. Now this is the drum beat entirely dry, just coming into the second channel on this mixer. Distorted bass drum, snappy snare, and kind of little hi-hat cymbal sound. That's going into this ring mod, as well as the output of the 510 synth voice. Now taking away the modulation of that synth voice, which is the VCA. You can hear that drum beat interact with the full synth voice, the droning wave, and come out of the ring mod. But by modulating the VCA on the synth voice, so that's also rhythmic and active and modulated. And by playing with tuning and filtering, there's some kind of weird interactive sounds going on. Nice interesting texture to add to the dry drum sound. Adding some panning modulation, because why not? So here's a patch making use of the Portamento. Adding glide, slew or lag or smoothing or sliding between both pitch values and modulation values. For now, let's pull the patch and start again. So I'm going to start with my droning synth voice, the 510, pitch information into CV input 1 on the Portamento, and I'm going to come out into the key input, the pitch input on the oscillator. just opening the filter, we can hear that pitch sequence passes through accurately. Now turning on the Portamento, this is like the Portamento on a keyboard. We'll add slew or glide between these notes. Right up to being a bit drunk sounding and silly. But the nice thing about having it on this particular module is we can CV the Portamento rate. So adding an LFO to the CV of that, we've got an LFO slowly making this Portamento time short or long, taking us from kind of non-slewed, non-Portamentoed notes up to notes that glide and slide a lot longer between themselves. Turning that off for a second, turn the filter down. I'm going to trigger the sample and hold from an external source, patch the sample and hold's output into the second Portamento channel, take that output into my filters cutoff, and we can hear that random stepping on the filter, and again we can turn that on and make that slide between these stepped random voltages. And it's nice that it kind of feels like an LFO, but it's smooth, kind of lagged, glided, slewed. Portamento, there's various words that mean the same thing here. Nice sliding, random, fluctuating random if you will, or stepped values. And again, I could take an LFO, say this one right from the 555 to control the rate of that. So some notes slide between, and some of these random values just step, hard stepping on and off as they would straight out of the sample and hold. Turning the pitch on. We've got two modulatable slew limiters or Portamento generators, glide lag modules. The advantage of gliding this sample and hold over it being on the actual section for sample and hold, which does have a lag time, is that we can CV it. We could also split the normal version out and do a Portamento version and have two different versions to patch around a system. Now here I'm kind of patch hacking or kind of misusing and abusing the Portamento as if it's some kind of filter, VCA, low pass gate type thing. Now, we can think of a Portamento, slew limiter, lag processor, glide as a kind of filter for sub-audio signals. It takes those stepped sub-audio modulation signals and smooths off the edges. Like the previous patch with pitch, it made all the pitch signals that would step between either keys pressed or notes in a sequence that kind of just changed instantly. They glide between each other, much like a filter rounds off the edges of a harsher wave to give us that kind of slewed, bent, filtered tone, if you will. Now, audio straight into this, coming straight out into the mixer for recording. And this is a saw wave, so I'm already losing a bit of energy in some high frequencies, but you can hear it kind of filters away, volume drops, kind of like a crude VCA. So if I plug an envelope in to say the CV of this, I've got myself a crude VCA or low pass gate or filter. In terms of what it's doing, it's more like a filter really than a VCA, but that volume effectively drops off and it behaves like a VCA. And with two of them, that gives us a lot of potential for the system. We could be fading in and out, slewing in and out LFOs, sub-audio, audio like I am here, and just generally kind of patching around, really getting a lot out of this 555. I hope this video has been useful. Thanks to Roland for the sponsorship. It's been great to work with Roland and present this 555 module. There's some great modules in the SYSTEM-500 range and I hope I get to explore some more of them soon. Cheers for watching. Support me on patreon.com/DivKid if you like the work I do. hit the thumbs up, all the usual stuff. Have a good day. See you next time.